Okay, hello. Welcome to the podcast. This is episode 34. Don't know why I need to inform you of that. Not like you're keeping track or anything. It is Monday, June 1st. Yes, we're into June, and it is race week in Monaco. How exciting. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about Monaco today, because it's the obvious thing to talk about, of course. And maybe we'll get to some news later. Just depends how long I spend talking about Monaco. And then throughout the week, of course, we're going to be doing all the build-up to the race and all the different storylines that could play out this weekend. Now, let's look at the calendar, first of all, because we actually have a run of races coming up. We're into the European season, so this is exciting. So after this weekend, next weekend, we're straight into Barcelona. Now, Barcelona is one of those tracks where you always think, yeah, I kind of know how Barcelona's going to go. We know what it is. It's always a sleeper banger, right? Barcelona. I always think because it's such a standard track, such a track that everyone is so familiar with, that you kind of go in yeah. And I feel like both of those tracks, both Barcelona and Austria, the one following it, are a bit like that. But they always seem to produce good races. So anyway, Barcelona the following week on the 12th to the 14th of June. Then it's a couple of weeks off, or a week off, and then the following weekend is Austria. And then directly after Austria, we're into the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. So Monaco and Barcelona, week off, Austria and UK, week off, Belgium, straight into Hungary, and then we're into the summer break. Another break, but we're used to breaks by this point. So really, we've got 6 races over 8 weeks. So that's cool. That's pretty cool. And you've got to say by the summer break, we should really have a clear picture of how the rest of the season is going to pan out. Very, very interesting. And there are so many different subplots going on in this season. You know, the broad plot of how is Formula One after this big regulation change. All the little subplots of how the teams stack up against each other, but of course how the drivers within the team stack up against each other. And of course, another huge element is the driver market and how so many people are out of contract at the end of this season. So I actually kind of am surprised that we haven't been hearing more about the driver market, but so much is really resting on what happens with Verstappen that I think that's, I guess, in some ways not surprising. But anyway, I want to talk about Monaco today because that's what we've got coming up this weekend. Now, I think it is just a spectacle. They call it the jewel in the crown. We know the controversy, we know the benefits, we know the drawbacks. Yeah, the race isn't great. The race is not great, but qualifying's great. It's a spectacular location. There's nothing like it. Yeah, there are street circuits, but there's nothing like Monaco. So love it or hate it, it's a unique proposition. So, you know, it's here to stay. Now, one of the things I want to talk about today is how could you make Monaco better? There's all very well complaining about it, and it ain't going anywhere. It's not going to be off the calendar because so much business gets done in Monaco. So, you know, it's not going anywhere. So rather than just whinging and moaning, what could you do? Theoretically, if you had limitless resources and autonomous power, what would you do? Well, interestingly, a couple of years ago, I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe last year, Alex Wurz, ex-F1 driver, former head of the GPDA, I believe, and did he work for the FIA? He was definitely involved in an organisational capacity. Anyway, he came up with some suggestions. So, we'll start out at the first opportunity. Right, well, I tell you what, let's walk around the track visually in our heads, okay? So, if you're familiar with the track, this should paint a vivid picture in your brain. If you're not, just sort of flow with me here. So the only real straight bit, and I'm using straight in inverted commas here, is the start-finish straight. And it's more or less straight. It's got a general slight curve to the right, a few little wobbly bits, but essentially it's a straight. But it is not very long. Now, the start-finish line is I would say 3/5 of the way down the straight. So there's not much of a run into the first corner off the line. There's, of course, often a fair amount of chaos on the first lap, because this race, if not decided in qualifying, is almost solidified after the first turn, right? Yeah, there's some pit stop fun and games, but if you get a situation like happened a couple of years ago when there was a big shunt on the first lap and everyone pits under a red flag and just changes their tyre and then just runs that to the end of the race, there's not even pit stop strategy to liven things up. So anyway, first corner is pretty critical, which is why people tend to make big moves. Because there's not a huge run into the first corner, even getting a bad start is not necessarily dreadful, because there's not literally the physical space for someone to get past you. So you can sort of defend that, even a bad start, into turn one. We know that the Ferraris are good off the line. I think their start advantage has been slowly diminishing over time. But the first turn is Saint-Devote, and famously a place where people can overshoot it, go into that little runoff area, and some of them do 3-point turns, some of them do little spin turns. It's kind of a silly little corner. I don't know if that's sacrilegious to say, but it looks a bit kind of wonky to me as a Formula One corner. But, there are worse corners. However, it's pretty slow, 90-degree right-hander, and that leads to going up the hill, right? Going up the hill is possibly the other straightest, again, in inverted commas, parts of the track. But it's going up and it sort of drifts left to right as you go up. You go through Beau Rivage, sort of halfway up the hill. And there's no real place going up the hill to overtake, because what becomes a spot on the right, with the way the track drifts to the left and to the right, you can't really hug either side because that space always disappears. That was what happened with Perez and Magnussen a few years ago. I think Perez tried to overtake Magnussen. Is that what it was? He went for a space that was always going to disappear, and that's where you don't see many overtakes going up the hill. It should be, seemingly, a place to overtake, but never really materializes. So then you take a left at Massenet, you go past the casino on the right, and that sort of right-hander there is called Casino. This is turn 4, by the way. And then we go downhill towards Mirabeau. Now this, just as you take that right-hander at Casino, is where that bump is that they all avoid. I think they were avoiding it less in the ground effect era because they could, take it more comfortably. We'll see with this era if they do that big jink to the right to avoid that bump in the road. You go down and then you're heading down to Mirabeau. Now this is an overtaking opportunity. This is that fairly tight right-hander where there is a runoff, you can go straight ahead. A lot of cars outbrake themselves and go down that runoff. A lot of struggling to find reverse gear because it's kind of a tight place to turn or spin turn or 3-point turn. A lot of cars end up just reversing back onto the track and just taking the right-hander as usual at Mirabeau. But there are overtaking opportunities there. You do see it. Oftentimes diving to the inside, coming down the hill. And they've got that little drain on the right-hand side that all the cars dip their wheel into, and it kind of really helps drag that car around that right-hand turn. And then we're getting into another overtaking opportunity at what used to be called the Lowe's hairpin. It's called the Grand Hotel hairpin, or I don't even know what it's called anymore. Is that what it's called? I don't even know. It's sponsored by, it's going to be called the Perplexity hairpin at some point, I'm sure, or something like, or the ChatGPT hairpin. I don't know. It's the most iconic, one of the most iconic corners in Formula One history, right? It's the one you see in all the pictures. Tight hairpin, famously has those sort of high walls on the inside border of that hairpin going downhill. Slowest corner on the track, slowest corner in Formula One, tightest turn in Formula One because it's more than 180 degrees because it sort of pinches back in. They have famously, I don't know if this is still the case, but famously they have a Monaco special steering rack that has a tighter turn than anywhere else on the calendar just for this race, right? They have to make the turning radius. That's the upper limit when it comes to extreme turning radius. They have to account for that corner when they're building the car. So anyway, that's an overtaking opportunity. A lot of silly, bumbling, wheel-to-wheel overtakes have happened there. If you get it wrong, you crash into a wall, inevitably, or you end up intermingled with another car. A lot of traffic jams where someone's tried to overtake, they've blocked the track, and then everyone behind kind of bumps up into them. Kind of an iconic place, but not a particularly impressive place to overtake. However, it is a possibility. There is a possibility for an overtake there. But in recent years, the size of these cars has really restricted that. There's been some very silly maneuvers. I think Stroll just drove into the back of someone last year or the year before, from memory. But yeah, that's the Hotel Hairpin, the famous one. Then we come round to Portier. So you go around the hairpin, you make a right. I think that's another version of a Mirabeau Bass Bar, however you pronounce that. And then you go down to what used to be the waterfront at Portier. Now there's a big old bit of reclaimed land in front of that, and another hotel, apartment building, something that's sort of beyond that. That's where Senna famously crashed and walked back to his apartment in a rage. Antonelli made a great pass there at the beginning of the race last year, I seem to remember, at Portier. And this is the final turn before you head into the tunnel. So, tunnel, we all know, right? We've seen them driving through the tunnel. It's a pretty fast section. It's got a slight bend to the right as you go through the tunnel. No real opportunity to overtake through the tunnel. There's sort of one way through that tunnel. Do you remember that insane reflex save by Isaac Hadjar in F2 through the tunnel? Someone was driving terrifyingly slowly through the tunnel, and Isaac saw him at the last minute and just jinked and somehow managed to get by him and not utterly bin the car in the tunnel. It's sort of a miracle that there hasn't been anything crazy happen through the tunnel. From memory, I can't think of a single incident that's been particularly noteworthy through the tunnel, which is somewhat surprising, actually. Anyway, they come out the tunnel and they're heading downhill. This is a huge braking opportunity, a lot of opportunity for disaster, and that has happened multiple times, as I've mentioned previously. But you're heading down the tunnel, you're going at a fair lick, right? You're going fast, and this is the second opportunity for an overtake. Now, you do sometimes see cars dive to the inside at this chicane, the Nouvelle chicane, and if you can come out the tunnel close enough and the car in front doesn't defend the inside for some reason, and you can just outbrake them and force them to the outside, that's a pretty good opportunity to overtake at the Nouvelle chicane. However, it's fraught with risk. You can aim for the inside and the leading car can drift across to defend it, and you've just got to pull out or somehow hope that you can pull out without wiping out the car in front or without having to bin it into the wall. Now, last year we saw Kimi Antonelli make a pretty standard error of just bashing the wall on the inside of the Nouvelle chicane heading in. That's happened so many times, you can't even really criticize Kimi for doing that. It's just such a common error to make when you're just getting closer and closer and closer to the barriers. But we're going to come back to Nouvelle chicane and talk about Wurz's suggestions in a bit. Actually, back to the hairpin as well. But anyway, that's an opportunity currently at the Nouvelle chicane. If you do outbrake yourself and you're on the outside, there is a runoff area. We see lots of cars go down the runoff area. You just basically go straight on and you go into a little sort of cul-de-sac that you have to get out of. All right, now you go through the Nouvelle chicane and you're getting into an absolutely no passing territory, incredibly impressive part of the track. This is going through the end of Sector 2 and into Sector 3. You come out the Nouvelle chicane, you've got a little bit of a straight line and you're going through to back this left-hand, incredibly impressive high-speed turn 12, and then you're into the swimming pool section. So there is a literal swimming pool that you're driving around, right? You're avoiding the swimming pool by taking a sort of dog leg around this swimming pool. And the speed that these cars take that swimming pool section is just mind-blowing. And they are shaving the barriers, millimeters, sometimes just grazing the barrier, slightly indenting the barrier to get the absolute best possible line through this section. There is no hope of an overtake through this section. I've seen at the chicane at the end of the swimming pool section the occasional maybe overtake. I'm sure they've happened. There have been overtakes, of course, at the wackiest places in Formula One. But really, it's just avoiding, at that final chicane of the swimming pool section, it's avoiding hitting the curb too hard and just binning it. So many people at that final chicane of the swimming pool section have gone over that curb, hit it a bit too hard, and just straight lined it into the barrier and just ripped off the right front of their car. Again, such a common mistake to make. And so really this whole section, there's nothing to be done. I don't think you should do anything because not everything is about overtaking. Sometimes just the joy of seeing a car fly through to back through the swimming pool section and heading towards the final section is just, well, sometimes, all the time, it's just breathtaking to see that. So anyway, that is the swimming pool section. You come out of that and you're heading into the final bit and you're heading into Rascasse. Now, this is, again, a very slow, it looks a bit silly, especially after coming out the swimming pool section. The cars are driving so slowly. They take the right-hander, they kind of drift to the left to take the right-hander. And this Rascasse is also an opportunity for overtakes. It is a little too narrow. And again, we're going to come back to Wurz's suggestions in a minute. But there have been a number of overtakes there. Again, the size of the cars has, in recent times, precluded this, and the fact that you haven't been able to follow through the swimming pool section means there haven't been too many dives up the inside or dramatic, unexpected overtakes around the outside. More often than not, attempts have ended up just this slow, silly, coming to a halt into the wall, oftentimes damaging the front wing, and then they kind of drag themselves into the pit lane if they can get out, because that's the entrance to the pit lane. At the exit of Rascasse, there's a pit lane entrance. And then you come onto the end of the lap, and it's the right-hander at the Anthony Nogues. It's a sort of very shallow chicane, and you take that right-hander and then you drift to the left as you go past that barrier on the left, the Anthony Nogues corner, and then you're onto the start-finish straight. And maybe, if you're close enough down the straight, an overtake into Saint-Devote. But in recent years, you just haven't seen that. Just hasn't been a thing with these cars. So that's the whole of the lap. I hope I painted a picture for you. And so let's go back over Wurz's suggestions. So essentially, there are 3 opportunities that he thinks the track can be adjusted to increase opportunities for overtakes. Because it is a dramatic track to look at. It is exciting to see the cars on track. But the big problem is you can't overtake. So it just becomes, the race that is, a procession. So let's go round in order. So let's go back down. You go around the track, you go up the hill, you go down, round the little bump, round Mirabeau on the right-hand side, and you go down to that Grand Hotel hairpin, the Lowe's hairpin, the Coca-Cola hairpin, whatever it's called now. His suggestion is to widen both the entry and the exit of the hairpin. He believes that's possible. I'm not a city planner. I'm not an architect, so I'm assuming, I'm taking his word for it, that that's possible given the geography of the lay of the land. So what he's suggesting is the line essentially wouldn't change, but the aim is to stop the drivers just parking right in the middle and acting as a roadblock. That's essentially the defending driver would have to commit to covering one side or another because there would be enough space to get alongside. So it would be an opportunity to late brake into the hairpin and force the defending driver to make a call, right? I think Bortoleto did that on Kimi a rather bold attempt, but this change would encourage that to happen more frequently and would be harder to defend. So there, an opportunity to overtake, an opportunity to open up the strategy of the race to enable faster cars to get past slower cars, or better drivers to get past drivers that are struggling. You're not in a situation where, like Ricciardo a few years ago, where, what was his issue? He was on ancient tyres, he was like missing a gear, he didn't have any kind of boost of some, I don't know, he was missing something fundamental, and yet he still managed to win the race despite an incredibly compromised car. And that is why Monaco needs to change. Not that I deny Ricciardo the chance to win, it could have been anyone, but the point is that even a car that is fundamentally doomed can still win the race. Such is the limitation of Monaco. All right, what's the next change that he's proposing? Well, let's go further around the track. So we go around the hairpin, through the tunnel, down the hill, and now here is a fundamental change. And this was the one that I alluded to before. I think this is the opportunity, and this is where Alex Wurz is suggesting things can change. This is where something can fundamentally change on this track. Now, right now, the Nouvelle Chicane coming down the hill, out of the tunnel, down the hill to the Nouvelle Chicane, it's not big enough for two cars to really fight. And there's not enough time for the cars coming out the tunnel for the chasing car to really attack the car in front. So Wurz is suggesting they move the chicane further down the track, make it later. So that's more of a straighter run, and then presuming profiling it in such a fashion that would encourage overtaking. Now that would require them to build out into the harbour a little bit. And remember when they actually added the chicane, they actually built out into the harbour once. So it can be done. And it's not like there ain't money in Monaco, right, to do something like this. So he's suggesting push that chicane further down the track, approximately 80 metres closer to back. That would give a longer run out the tunnel. You could make a straighter approach into the braking zone, so they're not braking and turning at all. So that would just literally be an out-braking race. And there would be more room to get an advantage into the left-hander rather than just there being one line and the defending car just holds that line and then the other car has to do something miraculous to get around. This would make it more of a 50-50. This is probably the change that would result in the most significant opportunities for overtaking. The benefit also with the hairpin and the fact that these new regulations mean these cars can follow closer means that all of that put together, they could potentially get alongside them at the hairpin, so they're right up their backside, follow really closely through the tunnel, and then pull out going down the hill towards the Nouvelle Chicane, and there being a straight out and out braking battle. Even if you're on the outside, if you're ahead at the apex, it's your right to then take the turn. That is potentially the biggest overtaking opportunity. So moving the Nouvelle Chicane further down the straight. That was suggestion 2. Suggestion 3, and the final one, is widening and reprofiling Rascasse. That's that final big overtaking opportunity at the end of the swimming pool section. You come through the swimming pool section, through that final little high-speed chicane. You've avoided the barrier on the right-hand side. You're drifting slightly to the left as you head to take a rather slow right-hander. That section, he's suggesting you can widen so there is not just one car line to defend. You would have to make a choice, go inside, go outside, and an overtaking opportunity could be increased there. There is already an overtaking opportunity, but this could make it hard. You're trying to make it harder for the defending car, right? You're always trying to make it so they have to commit left or right. He's saying that could be widened and reprofiled a little bit to make that a significant overtaking opportunity. And that doesn't seem like, again, presuming this is geographically possible, right? I don't have the blueprints, that seems like a fairly reasonable change, right? That could be done. There just has to be the political will. So my theory has been with all of these changes is that they have been pinning their hopes on this 2026 reg change to see what happens this year. If it's still a procession with all of these regulation changes and the race is still just cars circulating and nothing changes, I think the pressure on Formula One to make changes for Monaco goes up. I think they've just put these plans on ice until they've seen what the reality of Formula One is in 2026 before anything changes. I hope something gets done. Because even with these new cars, they're not that much smaller. Yes, they can follow closer. Maybe that means they can follow closer through the tunnel and there's more overtaking at the Nouvelle Chicane. Maybe some overtaking at the hairpin. I don't see it necessarily at Saint-Devote. That's still a difficult place to overtake. Maybe a bit at Rascasse. Again, the width of these cars is negligibly smaller, but maybe they can follow better through the swimming pool and through that final chicane in order to get a better run into Rascasse. So I'm not assuming that there's going to be no overtakes this year with these new regs because there have been significant changes in the racing this year. Now also, they're much torquier, these cars, so coming out that chicane, the car in front doesn't necessarily get so much further away because that distance between the cars can be maintained, coming out of a slower corner. So I'm, ever the optimist. I'm hopeful that maybe even without changes, there might be increased opportunities for overtakes. But if we leave this weekend and it is still a procession, even with these new regs, I think the pressure is going to be on Formula One more than it ever has been. And I hope these or other changes by other people, other suggestions could take place. You could really change things up by going completely off the grid and Portier going left, for example, at Portier and there's a big long straight section there. You could do a tight hairpin and come back. I was looking at the map there. It's very complicated that. It would be so disruptive. But, we're talking radical, magical thinking here. But even with the changes that Wurz suggested, even without the Nouvelle Chicane complete reprofile, making it wider at the hairpin, changing Rascasse, seems like it could be possible, right? Seems like something could be done. So what do you think? What changes would you make if you had ultimate control over changing Monaco? And I'm sure there are going to be the snarky comments like, don't go there. But remember what I said, this is like the business race. This is where all the sponsors fly their executives and all the Formula One teams woo their sponsors and Formula One woos their investors. This is the place where all the business gets done, so it ain't going anywhere. And all the drivers live there because it's a tax haven, except the French drivers, actually. They don't get that benefit. The French drivers can still live there, but they'll still have to pay their tax. So anyway, I don't really have time now to get into any more news because I blabbed on about the track in Monaco. I did have a quick scan and there's nothing that you desperately need to know about. As of 8:40 a.m. on June 1st, East Coast time. I will probably do a big news review tomorrow. But yeah, that's Alex Wurz's suggestions for how to change Monaco. And I'd be interested to hear what you would say. You can leave comments on Spotify. Did you know that? You can leave comments on YouTube. You can leave comments on my social media platforms if you'd like. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you would change Monaco, because it isn't a straightforward process. It's been something that's been talked about for decades, and no one's really figured it out. Well, other than changing the Nouvelle Chicane, have they ever changed much? Have they even tried? Anyway, I hope you have a great day. I will be back again tomorrow, because this is a daily podcast, the only daily Formula One podcast, I should add. More Formula One chat, news, Monaco talk, drama, politics. So you've got that to look forward to. Okay, have a great day. I'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye for now. I've been your host, Jamie Muffett. You can find me on social media for more of this rambling nonsense under my name or F1_Jamie. This is an RPS audio production.